Hi, sci-fi fans. Welcome to Visionary Stories. Please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Thank you.
Alien Inheritance, the sequel. Chapter 1. Return of the Forbidden Couple. The sky outside the cockpit pulsed with violet swirls and golden cloud bands as Velana Prime came into view, slush and radiant, a planet unlike any John had ever seen. Beneath the planetary rings and swirling storm belts were crystal cities glittering like glass domes beneath twin suns. John leaned forward in his seat, gripping the armrest as the ship gently descended. "Well," he muttered, "that's definitely not Kansas." Athea's eyes sparkled beside him, her fingers dancing across the ship's controls with practiced ease. "This is my home," she said, calm and unbothered, as if she hadn't spent the past 60 years frozen in a stasis pod on another planet. Velana Prime, John didn't say what he was really thinking, that he'd never seen anything more beautiful except the woman beside him. As the sleek vessel locked into landing sequence, Athea reached over and took his hand. Hers was warm, steady. His was trembling just slightly. The landing pad was massive, surrounded by thousands of curious onlookers. Velanians and tall, with shimmering skin tones that ranged from pearl to sky blue, stood in awe as Athea stepped out onto the platform. Crystalline banners fluttered high above, and from overhead a musical voice echoed across the plaza in formal Velanian dialect. "She lives! Athea of House Cyril, daughter of science, has returned!" A cheer erupted so loud it made the ship vibrate. And then John stepped out behind her. Silence. Deafening, eerie silence. The crowd stared. John raised a hand and offered a sheepish little wave. Hi?" Thousands of Velanians tilted their heads in synchronized disbelief. Athea didn't flinch. She stepped closer to John, laced her fingers through his, and led him down the platform like nothing at all was unusual. It took less than a minute for the council to appear. 13 elders in silver ceremonial robes parted the crowd without effort. At the front of the group was a woman with piercing, judgmental eyes and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled since the last ice age. She stopped a few feet away, her voice low but sharp. "You brought a human." Athea raised an elegant brow. "His name is John." John nodded, mustering a grin. "Big fan of your weather?" The woman didn't blink. "Emergency review. Immediately." The council chamber was a shimmering dome of glowing crystal, suspended above the Capitol like a throne in the sky. John sat uncomfortably in a seat that was clearly not made for his build, surrounded by beings who stared at him like he might suddenly molt. Athea stood tall, regal, serene as ever. She didn't seem fazed by the 12 counselors or their icy reception. "How long have you two been mated?" one of them asked. John choked on his breath. We don't really." 5 Earth weeks," Athea replied flatly. 6 Earth nights, 4 repeat performances. John blinked. "You keep stats?" There was a long silence. One of the older councilwomen fanned herself slowly. "He is an unknown variable," said another counselor, squinting at John as if inspecting a stain on velvet. "I'm not here to change your planet," John said, sitting up straighter. "I'm just here because I love her, that's all." That gave them pause. Even Cyril, the sharp-eyed woman from earlier, tilted her head slightly, lips pressing into a tighter line. The council murmured among themselves for a moment that felt like an hour. Finally, Cyril spoke. "Provisional allowance granted, temporary cohabitation under observation. A final judgment will be rendered in due time." "So, that's a yes?" John asked. "That's a not yet no," Cyril corrected. Athea smiled faintly. "Progress." The city lights glittered like stars made of glass as John stood at the edge of their temporary suite, staring out the window. Twin moons hovered in the sky. Hovercrafts buzzed quietly between towers like silver insects. "They're not thrilled I'm here," he said without turning. Athea stepped up behind him, sliding her arms around his waist, her cheek resting against his back. "They'll adapt." He let out a breath. "You're calm for someone who just introduced intergalactic scandal." Her voice was warm. You're worth it. Through the open balcony window came the faint sound of whispers. 3 young Velanian women perched on a nearby rooftop, peeking through glowing binoculars. He let her touch his lips, one whispered. He responded, voluntarily, gasped another. Their faces are so close, murmured the third. It's kind of pretty. John turned his head slightly. Are they watching us? Yes, Athea said, unbothered. They're studying. He blinked. Studying what? She kissed his neck gently. Connection. John chuckled softly. We're in so much trouble, aren't we? Athea's tail curled lightly around his leg. Only the fun kind. The next morning, John woke up to the sound of whispering. It wasn't Athea. She was still asleep beside him, one leg casually draped over his waist, her hair a moonlit cascade across the pillow. No, the whispers were coming from outside the window. Again. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake her, and peered through the crystal shutters. 4 young Velanian women were crouched on a nearby ledge, heads together, whispering and pointing. One of them had a notepad, another had... Was that a sketch pad? John muttered under his breath. Am I trending? Later that day, Athea stood on the open terrace of their suite, stretching beneath the twin suns in nothing but a silky wrap that clung to her hips. The balcony overlooked a garden path that just happened to be a popular route for passers-by. Within minutes, 3 young women had stopped to pretend to study a flowering tree. Then 5, then 8. Athea noticed, and she smiled. She walked inside, found John sipping water in the kitchen, and declared, We're going to give a lesson. John blinked. We? She raised a brow. You are the first naturally bonded mate in over 4 centuries. We have an obligation. John held up his hands. Whoa, I'm flattered, really, but I don't think your people need me giving a TED talk on spooning. They don't need theory, Athea replied. They need examples. That afternoon, Athea stood before a small group of curious Velanian women in a private garden dome. She had changed into her human disguise, tan, golden-skinned, with waves of platinum blonde hair, soft lips, and a figure designed to cause stirrings. The moment she walked in, there were gasps. Someone dropped their tablet. This is how humans define sensual beauty, she said, turning slowly. They use curves, softness, subtle scent, and clothing designed to make the mind wander. One of the younger women raised a hand shyly. Your form, it's so... exaggerated. Precisely, Athea replied with a grin. It invites attention, interest, desire. Would you like to try? Gasps again, hesitation. Then one stepped forward. Back at the suite, John was sitting on the couch, casually munching on a nutrient wafer and trying to not feel like the subject of an interstellar social experiment. He barely heard the door open before Athea sauntered in, glowing with satisfaction. You've been volunteered, she said sweetly. He looked up, wary. For what? To assist with field instruction. John froze. That sounds suspiciously like a euphemism. Athea's smile deepened. A few of the participants are struggling to understand technique, emotional feedback, duration control. He coughed. You want me to... I will supervise, she said, waving it off. They are eager and gentle, John stared at her. You're serious? Her eyes gleamed. It is for the greater good. An hour later, John emerged from a private garden room with his shirt halfway untucked, his hair tousled, and his expression somewhere between dazed and awed. He walked past Athea without saying a word. She smirked. Well? He turned, blinked once, and said faintly, They took notes. Athea's lips twitched. And? John rubbed the back of his neck. One of them saluted when I left. Another called me prime efficiency. Athea looked absolutely delighted. I told you, you're a catalyst. John collapsed on the couch. I'm going to need electrolytes. That night, the streets of Velana Prime began to shift. Elegant, buttoned-up robes gave way to high-slit gowns, translucent fabrics, gemstoned waist chains. Perfumed trails lingered in the air. Even the way the women walked had changed. Hips rolling ever so slightly, shoulders back, eyes direct. Men stumbled into fountains. Arguments broke out over hair products. Someone installed a mirror wall near the public archives. Athea watched it all from their balcony with a smirk. "They're adapting quickly," John said, sipping water like it might save him. Athea glanced sideways. "You haven't seen anything yet." It started with a handhold. Nothing dramatic, just Athea lacing her fingers through John's as they strolled through the grand market of Velana Prime. He didn't even notice at first. He was busy staring at a vendor selling something that looked like translucent grapes filled with glowing honey. But the people noticed. Velanians didn't walk close together. They didn't hold hands. They didn't touch unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then it was usually with gloves, protocol, or awkward apologies. And yet there she was. Athea of House Serral, returned from the dead, openly touching a human male's hand with no shame whatsoever. The whispers followed them like perfume. She initiates contact? He allowed it? Is that what mated looks like? John glanced around and caught the eyes of a few passers-by. Some turned away instantly, others stared openly, their curiosity naked. Athea seemed completely unaffected. She bought fruit. She leaned close to whisper jokes in John's ear. She adjusted his jacket collar like it was the most natural thing in the world. By the time they reached the central promenade, a small crowd had formed at a respectful distance, silent, watching. John muttered, "Are they following us?" Athea sipped something fizzy and iridescent from a tall crystal glass. "They are observing. We are anomalous." "You make me sound like a science fair project," she grinned. "You are far more entertaining." That night, Athea changed the game. In a public square near the university gardens, she took John's hand again, only this time she stopped, leaned in, and kissed his cheek. Gasps echoed like music through the plaza. Someone dropped a bag of ration wafers. A small girl tugged on her mother's robe and whispered, "Why did she do that?" John blinked. "That was bold." Effie smirked. "That was basic." The next day, everything shifted. It began subtly. A few younger Velanian women, dressed a little differently. One rolled the sleeves of her robe halfway up, scandalous by local standards. Another left her hair unbraided and added a small jeweled clip at her temple. Two women were seen walking close together, laughing, one brushing a hand against the other's arm without flinching. By the third day, a group of female students stood in a half-circle around the statue garden, watching the security footage of Athea kissing John. Frame by frame, analyzed like sacred text. "It's the angle of her neck," one whispered. "And the timing." "She lingered," another murmured. A third nodded solemnly. "And he didn't recoil. He smiled." Later, in their private suite, John was sharpening a knife from the Earth Kitchen kit when he looked up and caught Athea posing in the mirror. She was in her native form, blue skin, glowing faintly under the lights, but had draped herself in a silky black robe that slid off one shoulder. "Are we going out?" he asked. "No," she said without turning. "I'm preparing an instructional visual." He raised an eyebrow. She turned slowly, one eyebrow raised. "For those who wish to understand the effects of posture, clothing texture, and suggestion." "You're giving seduction lessons now." Athea's smile was sharp. "Teasing ones. The real lessons come later." Later that evening, a soft chime echoed through the suite, an incoming message from the Planetary Governance Subcouncil. Athea scanned the note quickly, then sat down beside John on the couch. He looked up. "Bad news?" "Not at all," she said, pleased. "They've authorized assistance with agricultural imports and basic cultural enrichment," Athea said with a serene expression that would have fooled most diplomats. John glanced at her datapad. "That list says aphrodisiac spices, instructional lingerie, and silk restraint kits. All under cultural enrichment," Athea said primly. "They didn't ask for specifics." John blinked. "Wait, are you saying the council just gave us permission to go back to Earth?" "It's not framed that way," Athea replied, but the implication is clear. We are free to gather what we require for integration support and transitional nutrition. John stared. They just gave us a shopping list, Athea nodded. With funding. He rubbed a hand over his face, laughing softly. You got the most uptight species in the galaxy to approve a grocery run. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. We leave tomorrow. You may wish to rest. Why? She kissed his jaw. Because you'll be busy. They started showing up outside the suite with notebooks. At first, it was just a few curious young Velanian women pretending to clean the walkway, then a couple of university students loitering near the glass lift, asking Athea vague questions about posture and emotional calibration. By the end of the second week, it was organized, scheduled. A small crowd gathered daily, eager, attentive, and wide-eyed, as Athea delivered impromptu observations on human behavior from their balcony. She wore flowing robes cut just a little too high on the leg, or sheer enough to silhouette the curves she wanted them to notice. She laughed loudly when John touched her. She leaned in close when she whispered. Sometimes she kissed his cheek just before he left for errands, and other times she pressed herself against him in a full-body embrace that made the crowd visibly squirm. John had a front-row seat to his new, accidental career as the galaxy's most studied boyfriend. One afternoon, as Athea adjusted the fit of a shimmering sash around her waist, he watched a girl across the street mimic the motion, slowly tying a ribbon around her own hips. Is this healthy? John muttered. Athea's eyes gleamed. It's educational! They're turning this into a school, a very hands-on one. By the end of the third week, women across the city had begun to adopt small changes in their behavior. Tiny cues learned from Athea's example. Slight eye contact, swaying steps, fingertips trailing across tablet screens as if absent-minded touch were suddenly a language. The older generations noticed, and they were not pleased. The summons came abruptly. The council reconvened, smaller this time, and clearly uneasy. The garden amphitheater was quieter than usual, tension coiling through the air like static. Councilwoman Sherelle didn't waste time. We have a situation. Athea stood poised as ever. John, standing just behind her, crossed his arms. He'd stopped trying to look like he fit in. Societal deviation among younger citizens has increased by 43% in the past 2 weeks, Sherelle continued. We are seeing changes in posture, language, personal attire, and mood, added another counselor. They're smiling at strangers. The catalyst is obvious, Zirel said, eyes on Athea. And biologically traceable, John leaned forward. Biologically traceable? A pheromone shift. In public gathering spaces near your quarters. Heightened curiosity. Emotional volatility. Increased physical interaction. John blinked. So, we smell too interesting? Athea said calmly. Your people are not used to stimulus. That does not make stimulus dangerous. It makes it destabilizing, Zirel snapped. You have become a phenomenon, and phenomena by nature are temporary. There was a pause, then a counselor slid a tablet across the table. We're authorizing a diplomatic expedition, she said. You are permitted to return to Earth to retrieve specific cultural and agricultural supplies. John's eyes narrowed. You're sending us away? We are offering space, Zirel corrected. A reprieve for the people. Time to reflect and return to center. Athea gave a subtle nod. We accept. She didn't mention that her definition of cultural supplies would soon include edible body oil, orgasm meditation tapes, and an industrial crate of satin, lace, and leather. They didn't ask. Later that night, as the city lights blinked faintly beyond the horizon, John lay on his back staring at the ceiling, arms folded behind his head. Athea sat at the edge of the bed, her native form glowing pale blue in the moonlight, brushing out her hair with slow, even strokes. He watched her in silence for a while. You think they'll actually settle down while we're gone? No, she said. But the council needs to believe they will. She paused, then looked over her shoulder, voice dropping. 8 months, John. 1 there, 1 back. He sat up. That's a long time in a tin can. Athea stood and stretched, arching her back, her silhouette lit like liquid moonstone. I will be busy cataloging and analyzing Earth cultural data. John blinked. And me? She stepped closer, tugging the blanket from his lap and sliding onto him in one smooth, unhurried motion. You will be assisted in managing the time. The next morning, the ship shimmered on its platform, sleek and silent beneath the first rays of sunrise. Athea kissed John before sealing the stasis chamber and whispered something soft and suggestive against his mouth that made his brain forget how words worked. As the pod closed around him, he caught a glimpse of her slipping into her modified spacewear. A sheer gold-trimmed bikini version of her original suit, perfectly tailored to her human form. His last conscious thought before sleep took him, "This is going to be the longest 8 months of my life."